Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice and tips and tricks from experts across the state. And we talk about all things plants, bugs, diseases, evergreens, your favorite shrubs, you name it. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope this show is something that you look forward to checking in with every single week. Episodes drop every Friday on Apple Podcasts. And to keep you inspired through the winter, it's so dark right now. And it's so fun to think about gardening. And believe it or not, there's a lot of things that we can still do this time of year to prepare for the upcoming growing season. And that is what we're going to be all about this winter. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode. And this show also airs on KKAT 860 AM right here in Utah on the weekends at 10 a.m. Now, I'm getting a lot of questions lately on, wait, how do I subscribe and listen to your show on my phone? Okay, so if you've never actually listened to podcasts regularly, if you have an iPhone, it's super easy. All you need to do is search for the app called Podcasts. It's right now, it's got kind of a purple microphone. And you find that podcast app, you open it up, and you just search for the word Gardening Utah inside the app, and it will bring up our little state of Utah with greenery all over it, and it will say Gardening Utah. You open that up and hit subscribe, and if you're just new to our show or you're listening on KKAT, you can go listen to all the past episodes. This is episode 31, so we started this show last March, and we've got a lot of very informational shows that you can go back and listen to and binge listen to all winter long while you're dreaming of spring and planning for spring. And I know that all the way back in last March when we recorded some of our very first episodes, they were so informative with tasks that, you need to do at that time, but also things you could have done over the winter to really have a beautiful spring. And we've really covered a lot of that in the last recent episodes. I want to just shout out to episode 26. That had Eric Marble from Chanshire Sod Farms. We talked about things you need to do to your lawn, and some of those things aren't too late. So if you haven't yet tackled anything with your lawn, listen to episode 26 and go out and get her done. And as far as some of the other recent episodes, we really kind of talk a lot about what I'm about to say in the tip of the week, and let's just get after it. You know what time it is. It's the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is, don't let those trees go into the winter dry. Listen, just because trees go dormant during the winter doesn't mean they're not immune to cold and dry conditions. Trees experience the stress of a harsh winter even though they may not show it. And it's usually a lack of water that does the most damage. Heading into the winter with dry roots can mean major trouble for your trees in the spring. So don't let those trees go into the winter dry. Even though it's gray and it may be gray and wintry outside, your trees still need you. So long, dry periods without supplemental water can damage the root systems and kill the tree. So although the tree may look normal in the spring, they could have been weakening all winter long, and then they'll usually show that dieback later in the summer. So those conifers, those pines, those spruces, those firs, get water on these trees before the ground freezes. So water acts like an insulator, both to the tree and the soil. And the soil that stays moist will be warmer. And likewise, the plant cells that are plump with water will be less susceptible to damage from the cold. And trees that are dormant don't need to be watered as frequently during the growing season. And when there is little to no snow cover and little precipitation, plan on watering your trees 1 to 2 times a month until they begin leafing out in the spring. Now, water only when the temperature is above 40 degrees and there is no snow or ice on the ground near the tree. And it's a good idea to water early in the day so the plants have time to absorb it before the temperature goes way down again at night. And so also trees like their water really slow and deep. So a soaker hose is a great idea. Put it on really slow and let it just get that ground really, really saturated. Now also, Be careful to apply the water all the way out to the edge of the tree's root spread. Most of the established trees have a root spread that's equal to their height, if you can believe that. So water really deeply with that soaker hose if possible, and also avoid getting any water on foliage, especially if you're watering an evergreen tree. The other thing you can do that is the best friend to your trees is mulch. Mulch is one of the best things you can do for your trees heading into the winter, and adding that layer of organic mulch in the fall protects that soil from moisture loss, and it also helps regulate that soil temperature throughout the weekend. Think of it as kind of like a blanket that can prevent all kinds of damage. So also, evergreen trees, think about it like this. They lose water through their needles in the dry winter air. So they need more stored up water going into winter to make up for it, especially if they are in a lot of cold, dry winds that really strip water from evergreens a lot faster than their roots can absorb it. And that's why it's really important to provide a sufficient water supply to these trees in the fall, and then water during any dry spells during the winter. Now, I know it feels counterintuitive to get the hose out now when everything's starting to get brown and gray, but it is critical to keep our trees alive and healthy. So don't ignore your trees this winter. Keep watering them and see how they thank you with a beautiful showing in the spring. And that was the tip of the week.
Never miss a tip for your garden. Never miss a tip for your garden. And never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Okay, so listen, if that sounded familiar, I did talk about that very thing in episode 26, which was at the end of October. We really didn't realize at the time how dramatic it would be on how we really need to do that this year. I mean, when was the last time you remember a snowfall or rain in the recent weeks? Our evergreens and any newly planted tree or shrub are desperate for water right now. So take those tips. And again, if you're listening to this on KKAT radio, go to Apple Podcasts and look up episode 31, and you can re-listen to my tips, and we'll get you all taken care of. Get out there this weekend. I know it's cold. Put on a couple extra layers and a hat, and get those evergreens watered, and anything that's new that you planted this year. It's inconvenient, but it's necessary based on what's going on right now. Okay, so this episode, I'm so excited. We have horticulturist Alex Grover, and also part comedian because he's quite funny. And we are going to be talking about a lot of different things today. But the primary thing that we end up discussing is fruit tree care. There are so many new fruit tree owners in Utah because, of course, it was the year of the yard, and so many people bought things to grow food into the future. Alex really keeps us in the know of what we need to plan for as a new fruit tree owner up into the future. He's a garden and permaculture expert. You're going to love him, so stay tuned. We'll be right back after this, right here on Gardening Utah.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me here is horticulturist Alex Grover. Thank you so much for being with me here today.
Hey, it's great being here, but I have to correct something there, okay? It's future Lord of the Universe horticulturist Alex Grover.
I love it. I love it. Well, we have been talking a little bit before the show. We have just been cracking up. I've wanted to have you on the show for so long. I even talked to you before I started it about being on the show in the future, so I'm really happy to grab you during the slow season, if you will.
Yeah, it is slow. I'm in here just chilling out on my lazy boy recliner, looking outside, wondering if the rain that they said might hit is actually going to hit or not. We'll see. But that does put us in a situation where I think any reasonable person can look out and say, you know, it's awfully dry this year.
Boy.
And that can correct very quickly in Utah weather because, A, we don't get a lot of water anyway. But we are short so far this year. And so I think it's really important that we're all thinking about the water situation and making plans.
Yes.
I know you've had local scapes experts on before. Really take some time to look at local scapes. Take some time to really understand what it takes to have a low water yard in Utah, because say what you will, I can document that we're going to need more water for all the people moving in, or we need to use less. And that's documentable. I really like the science. I really like being able to say, and right now, even if it's not a drought year, there are cities like Lehigh where they just don't have enough water in their irrigation system. And if you're up on the hill, every year is a struggle. Even in a good year, there's still struggles. They just don't have enough water for their system. So you can say what you want, but I've been there. I know it. Don't live in Lehigh now, but I did, and I watched the neighborhood suffer in those years where it was dry because it just literally wasn't enough water to push it up the hill. It just wasn't enough.
Yeah. And, I've seen a few charts over social media lately about how bad the drought is in the state of Utah right now. And it's so sad because in a normal news year, quote unquote, I feel like the drought situation would have been getting so much more media and press coverage to inform Utahns. But right now that's not happening because of everything else going on in the world.
It's been a crap year. I mean, let's just face it. I mean, I'm still glad I don't live in the Middle Ages because those were crap years every year.
Yeah.
But, I mean, for our modern times, this has been a bad year. And I don't care which side of the political divide you're on, it's been rough. Certainly, what your opinion on masking or whatnot is, those people that have had COVID can tell you, it's been rough. And, here in Utah, we had an earthquake. Well, fortunately, there wasn't a lot of damage, but I was at a lot of properties this year, and things were, I've got a crack, my wall shifted, my stones don't fit the way they used to, just various rather small things are there, but from the earthquake. But if you take it overall as a year, it's been kind of a rough year.
Yeah.
I work in the nursery industry as well as doing landscaping, and we had record sales this year. I mean, everywhere had record sales, and there's certain plants where they are just run out. Normally this time of year, you'll be able to go and you'll be able to get this or that, and you can still get stuff, but you can't get as much variety as we've had in previous years at this time of year. And that's trickled down because I was talking to the buyer at my nursery, and he got his stuff in at a decent time for his orders for next year, because we're ordering, sometimes as early as June or July, we're ordering for the next year.
Oh, wow.
And so he got stuff in for this one vendor. It was actually kind of later because he did his smaller orders up front. I usually do the bigger ones first, but anyway. And he got this order back, and monetarily they could only fulfill half the order because there was so much stuff that was bought out. Now, some of that went to this year. They said, oh, well, we're sold out of everything. Let's go into next year's stock. And some of that's everyone that was getting hit heavy early this year, we're ordering for next year. But reality is this plant material is going somewhere, or it's already depleted, and there's not enough to go around for what everyone wants. On this order, I work with him a lot on the fruit trees because that's one of my expertise. Not a single one of the fruit trees he ordered from this vendor was available.
Oh, my.
Yeah, about that. Now, we've got a secondary order that's got some fruit trees, and our nursery doesn't do a lot of fruit trees. This is not our specialty, but people come in, they want fruit trees, we sell fruit trees.
And your nursery is Landscape Supply and Draper, correct?
Landscape Supply and Draper. It's on 123rd South.
Okay.
I've still got some apples, by the way. I've still got some nice Zestar apples.
Really?
Yes.
Hey.
And that's a great one because it's an early apple. It's kind of tart, but most early apples will keep maybe 2 weeks. This one will keep 1 to 2 months. And so it's really good for that because that time of year you don't get storage apples very easily.
Right.
So anybody out there, drop by, tell them YouTube, or not YouTube, but tell them the radio sent you or a podcast sent you. But those are great if If you want an early apple, it's a little bit tart, good keeping, great apple.
So
Anyway,
Zestar apple?
Zestar, yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And that's a great little tidbit. But again, for this upcoming year, and this isn't just fruit trees, this is ornamentals, shrubs. Oh my gosh. Some of our bread and butter shrubs we're going to be absolutely struggling for next year. And again, this is going to vary from nursery to nursery. If the boss had said, oh, there's a rush, let me get everything done in August, that might not have been the case for us. But if we're short this year on ordering, then there's going to be shortages out there in the system. The other thing is prices are going up. The boss put a lot of stock into this order because it was a little bit cheaper than some of his other vendors because they upped their prices this year. So prices, you're going to see those go up. So next year, we're going to have systemic problems with shortages.
Okay.
And we're going to have increased prices. And from my perspective in the nursery trade is I'm going to have to just suck up and deal with it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that also means the consumer is going to have to do a little bit of sucking up and dealing with it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of this stuff is still available from vendors that my boss hasn't used before. I've been trying to get him to go with some that he's had some troubles in the past that have kind of changed their tune and improved a little bit. But once you get burned, I can't blame him. He's shying away from those. I'm not sure that we have a reasonable choice.
Yeah.
And so as you go in from now until at least 2022,
yeah,
there are going to be running shortages. And it's because so much got done this year. Everyone was under lockdown. Everyone needed something to do. The nursery was still open. They went out and they bought a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind that we can't just go out and manufacture something in a day or a week.
Yeah. I mean, these are things that have been working for years.
It's going to take years. I think a small 5-gallon fruit tree is a 2 to 3 year project.
Yes.
It may be a year and a half, but between everything that you're doing, it ends up being multi-year.
Yeah.
And so, and the really shame is on the fruit trees in particular, is those are sold out now, but in 5 years, nobody's going to want fruit trees because they got past everything and they're not taking care of the fruit tree that they have. And so it's really bitter that way because I would like that kind of culture where we're looking ahead to be here constantly, not just in the year and it was rough and the year after was rough.
Right.
One of the things I've done in the past is I've worked with city emergency teams. And, I'm not one of the survivalists or one of the hardcore preppers or anything.
Sure.
But a lot of people found out this year that by having a garden, having fruit trees, they're insulating their own food supply. The thing is, that doesn't happen last minute. You have to prep that and you have to have fruit trees that you've maintained. It takes 3 years for them to be reliably productive as a minimum.
Yes.
And so if you're not doing this for the long term, you've already failed.
Yeah.
And I use the word failure. A lot of people don't like to use that, but I like to use it because it's failures that teach you.
Yeah.
We saw this in the 2008, 2009 recession. People were going gonzo buying fruit trees in 2009, in 10, and then it dropped off till last year. The last nursery I worked at, really, we were just skipping along on fruit trees, and the boss got fed up and just sold them really cheap after I left the company.
Mm.
They could have used those fruit trees now because they have nothing.
Right.
Nothing. And so the long term looking ahead is really one of the keys to gardening. Gardening is not a now. Even when you go out and you buy your peppers and tomatoes as starts and throw them in the garden, you don't get peppers and tomatoes instantly.
Right.
You've got to look ahead and you've got to have a plan for further ahead. And if you don't do that, you won't get the benefits you want out of it.
Absolutely.
And so this feels cliche saying this, but gardening is something that has to be part of your lifestyle if you're going to do it.
Yes.
And in our current situation, I know a lot of people who are, but a lot of the people who got into it this year, it's not their lifestyle. Unfortunately, it's a fad brought on by hard times.
Yeah.
The more long term you decide to make it is when you get the benefits.
Yeah.
And that comes down to too is I once had in a talk with a gentleman I worked with, and I was talking about getting stuff ready and having your best crop next year and the future years. He says, I don't want a good tomato in a year. I want the best tomato now.
Right.
You can get it now, and that's fine. But in reality is, if you really want to do this, it's long term. It's not about the now, it's long term. And if that's one thing that I can teach people about gardening, is to take the long term approach and make it a permanent part of your life.
I love that bit of advice. It's like the thing that I love to think about gardening is looking ahead to the future. Well, so when we come back right after this break, we're going to have more with horticulturist Alex Grover. And in fact, maybe we can get him to talk to us a little bit about fruit tree care coming up in the next few months. Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jana Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me is the Lord Horticulturist, Alex Grover. I didn't do that as well as you did in the last segment.
Don't worry, the title changed depending on how bad my megalomania is in the moment.
There you go. I love it. Okay. So in the last segment, so interesting, and you were mentioning how fruit tree sales have gone crazy this year, and you're exactly right. A lot, you get excited about, oh my gosh, it's the Victory Garden year, it's the year of the yard. I've got to buy all of this plant materials so I can have my, food into the future. But then it's like, I didn't realize that now I have to prune and I have to spray and I've got a cherry and an apple and a plum. What do I do? And I'm excited to have you on in future shows so that we can keep, Utah gardeners on task with what they need to do at certain times of the year about their fruit trees. But why don't we kind of give some tips on when they should be setting their phone reminders on just different times of the year with spraying and pruning and stuff?
Okay, first of all, I start pruning generally in January. Now, if you go out and talk to a lot of the experts who don't have a lot of fruit trees to do, they'll say, do it the day before it blooms. Okay, first of all, if you don't have a lot of experience, you don't know what day it's going to bloom. Second of all, I've worked professionally doing fruit trees for a number of years until my body finally gave out, and my truck for that matter. And the reality is in Utah, if you start in January, you're fine. It may not be 100% the best time of year, but it's about 99.8 or 99.9. It's just fine. Particularly if we've hit that cold time of the year. Sometimes I'll start early in January, sometimes late in January, depending on how cold it's gotten. But December and January are the two coldest months, and I want to have at least a start of that really, really cold season, because that will put the plants into full dormancy, particularly your stone fruits. And any branches that are going to die from cold or from previous damage and then just get finished off by cold will have done their stuff. They're already going to be gone. If you start pruning a peach now, it may do okay, but 10 to 1 says you're going to miss a bunch of branches that are going to cold kill. So wait till January. Kind of pay attention to the weather report. I'm really accustomed to looking at the temperature on that, knowing, okay, this is about where it's going to get, even on years where it's warmer. Right now, I can say right now, we're going to get colder. Don't start now, but start again for a homeowner late January. Okay. For me as a professional, when I was doing it professionally, I would do it earlier just because I had so much to do. It's either do it then or not get it done.
Right.
And I would pick a day that you're expecting it to be dry. water transmits infection. Not that there's a lot of infection problem right in January, but you just don't want to invite problems, particularly with rain. If it's warm enough to rain, you're getting into that range where it's warm enough for infection. So I'd recommend you start in late January as a homeowner. I'd recommend you don't rush out and do it.
Okay.
For a beginning pruner, there's nothing better than a roll of masking tape that you can put on the tree and say, I want to take this limb off right here, and walk away.
Got it.
If you walk away, then you can come back and say, oh my gosh, I was tired that day. Oh my gosh, the kids were screaming and I was distracted, or I wasn't relaxed. Why in the world do I want to take off this branch?
Yeah.
And you haven't taken it off yet, so you're okay. You've had some time to think about it. And that's the way I learned how to do things in college is, go ahead, put some tape on it first.
That's a great
no harm, no foul.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then the one thing you need to start doing now is you need to start learning how to prune.
Yes.
USU's got some great pruning videos. I've got some pruning videos. I'm constantly getting demands to have one for a large neglected tree. Unfortunately, trying to do a video of that when you're just one person with a static camera, or one person trying to move around the tree and show everything close up, and then it's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and get some friends to help me or something this year so that I can present that. But keep in mind that is very difficult to show that even under best of circumstances, because an overgrown tree can be 40 foot tall and 40 foot wide. If it's an old apple on a non-dwarfing rootstock, that's a lot of territory, and it takes me hours to prune it.
Yes.
Even if it's been maintained. I've got one of my father-in-law's, it's a minimum hour prune just because of it's a full 50-year-old tree just about now.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. But if you can learn the principles and learn, okay, this is where the immune system is. This is where I don't want to cut. This is where I do want to cut. I don't want to leave a stub. And learn some of those basic science stuff. That is actually the easiest stuff. The hard thing is the artistic part of it.
Yeah.
I work in the landscape and I've worked in pruning, so I've got a very good spatial awareness. I can look at the balance and the density. All these things are things that artists do.
Yeah.
The science is actually really easy if you decide to pay attention to it. But you have to tie into that artistic side to say, oh, it feels too dense over here.
Uh-huh.
Or, and that's all artistic stuff that's a lot harder to teach. But if you're aware that you're looking at the artistry of it, then it becomes easier. The best people I've taught to prune trees, I give them, 10, 20 minutes worth of scientific do's and don'ts at most. And then they let the inner artist flow, and it works beautifully. Something that's actually a little harder. We teach science and we teach math, but we don't really do a good job of teaching art in our culture. And that shows when I'm teaching people how to prune. They just don't know, oh, this is going to be 25% or this is going to be 10%. They don't have a feel for it.
Yeah.
I can give them numbers, but they don't have a feel for it. And when I'm out there, it's not like I can weigh this stuff to find out how much or anything like that. I have to make evaluations. And it's a learned skill. And again, artists learn it so much quicker.
Yeah. Oh, that's so fascinating. It's kind of like, I never thought about that when you're looking at a fruit tree, there's an art and a science to what you're doing when you're pruning. I love that. That is such a good
and the thing we do even worse than teaching art in our society is teaching how to use art and science together.
Yeah.
We don't do that unless you get into some specialty. And that's one thing I like about my horticulture degree is it really allowed me to combine those, because there's things I do love.
Yeah.
And it's one of the few areas where I feel like I can combine this and have a great time. As we go on, we're not going to get into this round, but you're also going to have to spray your trees.
Yeah, so right after this break, we're going to get into the next step, which is when to spray your trees. Stay with us right here on Gardening Utah.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT, with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and with me here is garden and permaculture expert, horticulturist Alex Grover. Thanks so much for being on Gardening Utah today.
Or just call me Lord of the Garden.
Lord of the Garden. The Lord of...
I'll have a new one every time we go around. We were talking about pruning, now we're talking about spraying. Now the spraying is difficult because when you spray varies depending on temperature and different climate type things. So I cannot tell you spray the second week of March because it all depends on where the plant's at. But I can tell you that USU has a great service where they give you updates of what you should be doing right then. And they send it to your email, you click on it, and you go to the web page, and it's got, this week's or this month's, depending on what time of year it is, spraying schedules.
Fantastic.
And those are very important because these pests just don't follow a calendar, they follow the weather. The other thing that's really difficult is you've got apples, you spray them one way. You've got peaches, you spray them a different way. You've got cherries, good luck on spraying them.
Right.
And then, plums don't have a lot of problems. Apricots have some, but each plant you get is going to have a different thing that needs to be done, and it's going to have different timing on it. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of what you should be spraying for, and then you're going to have to follow USU for exactly when. Now, in the spring, just as things are starting to, leaves are emerging, if I remember right, on peaches, is when you're going to spray for coronium blight, which is a fungus.
Yes.
There's about a dozen copper sprays that do perfectly well on that. Bordeaux mixture, anything that has copper in it, it's going to do that. Apples, you may need to spray for fire blight, in which case you'll spray when they're blooming. I generally don't like doing that because it's an antibiotic spray, and we have way too many antibiotics that have been misused for so many years. And Utah has we do get fire blight, but we have a low general risk. So I can usually resolve that issue by pruning as soon as I see that there's an infection. A couple of years ago, we had a perfect spring for it. That was the difficult year. Again, that's going to be right when they bloom. I can't tell you a date, but when they're blooming, you spray according to the label. And then whenever you spray it is always according to the label. Also, some of these copper sprays, Bordeaux mixture, are certified organic. The fungicides are some of the nastiest stuff that you can get. So just on your peaches, be aware. Coronium can be bad some years and going to be fine the next on the same tree.
Gotcha.
Just be aware. Again, with your fire blight, it's an antibiotic. If you have had problems consistently with a variety of tree or in a certain areas, the only time I'd really worry about that too much, or based on my experience with weather, I might say, if we have a really rainy period and certain temperatures from here to here, maybe you should spray. Usually I don't do that. I like to keep it to a minimum.
Yeah.
Now with apples, after that, the big thing is going to be codling moth. All those little worms in the apples, That's probably our major pest as far as the animal world goes. And that one you're going to have to spray through the summer. Usually starts June or July-ish when you have to start spraying, and that'll go through August, sometimes into September. But where there's two generations in most years, sometimes you'll get a third generation. You almost always get two generations. And depending on what you're spraying with, if it has a low residual, that means you can be spraying every week.
Wow.
To get 99% kill.
Yeah.
The other thing is you have to have a sprayer that can actually get up into whatever tree you have. And a little pump sprayer from Home Depot is not going to hit the top of your apple tree.
Yeah.
If you keep them pruned well, you can keep them down to 12 to 16 feet fairly easily, but you have to prune every year. You can keep them lower, but you have to get into summer pruning, and that's a whole different discussion. So you've got to look at it and make sure you've got a sprayer that can get as high as you need, or a method, that's you can safely access those. And again, that's going to be at least a period of over 2 to 3 months, you're going to have to keep those plants sprayed. It can be done organically. All the organic spraying, again, those are usually only good for 5 to 7 days. Keep that in mind.
Okay.
Your peaches, the next insect pests you're going to have to worry about are your greater and lesser peach tree borer. Greater peach tree borer has a tendency to be further down, lower part of the trunk. The lesser peach tree borer or twig borer is going to be in the twigs. I don't have spray times for those right off the top of my head. Greater peach tree borer, again, mid-June into July is when you start, and that's going to be going through the rest of the summer. The lesser peach tree borer, I do not know as much about because honestly, I don't spray for it as much. That's when you get a worm inside your peach.
Right.
That's that. But again, it's going to be a little bit more towards late spring, early summer when you do that. And I don't think you have to spray for as long. I wish I had my chart ready.
Yeah.
But again, these are going to be temperature variables. So if you get onto the USU mailing list and read that every time it comes out, you will know exactly when to spray.
Yeah, and so I think what I'll do, if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast, I will make sure to put the link to that in the episode notes so that our listeners will know exactly where to go.
Big thumbs up, because that is a resource our taxes pay for.
Oh,
but you know what? We all benefit from that.
Absolutely.
And let's get the benefit from what we paid for. And it's a great benefit. It really is. Now, the other thing, your peaches are your most popular fruit, your peaches and nectarines. Nectarines are just fuzzless peaches.
Yep.
Genetically, they're the same species. Nectarines just a mutation. The second most popular fruit is apples. And the third is probably going to be your cherries.
Yeah.
Now, cherries are hard because trying to keep one of those down to 16 foot is a pain in the tush. Oh. They really, really, really want to try and be that 40-foot tree. And you can say, well, I've got it on semi-dwarf. Okay, great. That puts it down to about 34 feet.
Yeah.
And so I can keep them smaller, but it's a lot of work even for me. It's really hard to keep them. They just don't like that. So the height on them is going to be harder. Second thing is the major insect pest with cherry trees is the cherry fruit fly. And it actually puts the egg directly into the cherry under the skin. So you cannot kill the larva. You cannot smother the egg. You have to use something that's going to kill the parent before they lay an egg.
Yeah. And
they are active for 30-something days. So the one company I worked for, I forget which spray he used, but it had like a 32-day active period. And it says, okay, the day after this is go pick your cherries, doesn't matter how ripe they are, because the cherry fruit fly will get them and I can't. That's how exact he was. I don't know what he does now. We've got some different options available now. And so those are really tough. Now, plums don't have a lot of problems. Sometimes you'll get plums, cherries, and apricots will also get the peach tree moths, caterpillars, grubs, whatever.
Yeah.
I hate it when they do those blank outs. Anyway, they will sometimes get those, but they're not as reliable that you're going to get them on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And so you can spray those or not spray those depending on the pest density in your area and what your past experience is. And so plums are actually kind of nice because in a lot of ways, they're just a lot more carefree than a lot of the other fruit.
You sold me. I added it to my list.
Pears can also be more carefree. They will get codling moth. They're certainly subject to fire blight. But again, I don't generally spray for fire blight, and they don't always get codling moth. So you can get really good pears with a minimal input. You still have to prune all of them, though.
Yes.
And you have to make a plan for this roughly. And after you've done it for a few years, you kind of know, well, it's about time to spray the peach. I need to pay particularly close attention, make sure I'm paying attention to the USU's notes on this. And that'll get you a long way. And if you do this enough, you can actually go, this is what the weather feels like. I better go mix up some spray.
Okay, gotcha.
One of the things I'm also going to say in this is one of my favorite sprays for insects is horticultural oil. This is a product that's been used for 100 years, has no pest resistance to it. It's not good for everything. Like I say, it's not going to kill the fruit fly, the western cherry fruit fly, but it's great for the early infestations of codling moths. I've used it successfully, and it's good for aphids and a lot of those small pests that we fret about that maybe aren't as bad. Just get them good layer on top of the insects, and they'll die.
Yeah,
and it's a great tool. And again, seasonality. All this is very seasonal.
Yep.
And that's really hard for us because we like doing things by calendar. Well, sorry, you can't.
Yeah,
you can't do it.
Especially nowadays when it seems like, the climate's just changing so rapidly. It feels like, at least right now, year to year, it fluctuates so much.
We are in a period, leaving the politics aside, where climate is not doing what it did when I was a kid.
Yeah.
There's always variability in climate, but there's a huge amount more variability. There's a huge amount more warmth. I go back and I'm always learning new things. So a while ago, I was doing a study kind of trying to find a climate station near me so I could see kind of what we've been, because the nearest ones I know of are in Pleasant Grove and Lehigh. I live in American Fork.
Okay.
I'm stuck between the two.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for, is there anything in American Fork, or was there? Anyway, climate change, I found records of it. It's real.
Yeah. So just like you said, sign up for USU's information and they'll send it to us when we need to know. And I can't believe that we have 30 seconds left of this episode, Alex. I can't thank you enough for being here. And how do our listeners find you?
I do YouTube videos on Grow How. If you're on Facebook, I run the Facebook group Utah's Best Gardening.
Okay.
And those are really, if you want to see my content, YouTube, Utah's Best Gardening, I'll answer questions. It's a small enough group, but I can keep up with it. All my admins are college trained.
Well, and you know what? I'll put links to those. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcast, I will be putting links to those in this episode. It is episode 31 of Gardening Utah, and you'll be able to link over to Alex's YouTube channel and his Facebook page as well. So, Alex, thanks so much for being here on Gardening Utah.
Hey, I've enjoyed it. This has been a great time. Hope we can come back in the future. There's so much more to talk about.
Absolutely. This January you'll be on. We'll talk about pruning at a little more length for everyone. Well, that's it for today's episode of Gardening Utah. As always, let us know what you would like to see on our show. Just send me a message on Instagram. The handle is @GardeningUtah. So just look up Gardening Utah on Instagram and you'll find us. Thank you so much to Alex Grover for joining me on today's episode. What a fun and interesting conversation. And I can't wait to have him back because he really knows so much about just so many different things with regard to gardening and trees and shrubs. But if anything else, he just knows the state of Utah so incredibly well. So it's so fun to have him on the show and can't wait to have him back. Okay, make sure you subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Just look us up in your podcast app, look up Gardening Utah, give us a subscribe, and that's where you will get notified every time we drop a new episode. And you know what? I love to get 5-star ratings. So while you're there, hit that star button on the right side, which gives us 5 stars. We really love when that happens. I'm Jana Francis. Shout out to our producer, Lambo. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next week on Gardening Utah. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah. Available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.
We are supported by ProgressivePlant.com. ProgressivePlants.com. They are your neighbors next door and experts at helping you choose the perfect and unique plants that will thrive in your location. Progressive Plants is passionate about helping homeowners, expert gardeners, novices alike choose the correct plant for your soil. They don't just grow plants, they know plants. Let Progressive Plants help you today. Just go to ProgressivePlants.com and check out their wide selection. You can also go to the Design tab and look at the expert designers that they have that can help you plan your perfect yard. Visit ProgressivePlants.com today.